I just wanted to sing this really quick and see if it encourages you. I hope it does. But it says, I pray for your healing. The circumstances would change. I pray that the fear inside would flee in Jesus' name. I pray that a breakthrough would happen today. I pray miracles over your life in Jesus' name, in Jesus' name. So pray for those who curse you. Bless those who curse you. Speak well of those who are not speaking well over you, because God sees all, God hears all, He knows all. And if you keep your heart right and His will be done, not yours, it's all going to work out. So I hope it encourages you today.
Honestly, I almost can't not smile when I listen to Mica talk, preach, sing, all of the above. You know, I obviously didn't know Mica personally, but just listening to her talk, yeah, I feel like I do know her. She radiates so much joy, and she just seems like she has such a gift to give, even after she's no longer here on this earth. I honestly feel like Mica does make a positive difference in the lives of others. You know, I've said this before, I'm not a religious person, but listening to her, she makes me want to be more spiritual. Truly, Mica is a gift, and I think that's why so many people feel so pulled to honor Mica and try to push for justice for Mica, because you could tell that she was just an inherently good human. Anyway, I wanted to start the video out with a little bit of Mica. I think it's always good practice to start any of my videos regarding the case surrounding Mica to honor her, because, like I said, she was a good person and she deserves to be honored. She deserved to be honored. And so here on this channel, I will make sure to always do just that. But anyways, welcome back to another episode of the Coffee with Crime podcast. I'm Brittany, and like I said, today we're going to be doing another update on the case of Mica Francis, because there is some stuff that has happened over the last couple of weeks since I made a video regarding her case, and I think it's stuff worth going over with you guys. For one, I'm going to start addressing Mica by her maiden name, Mica Francis, versus Mica Miller, because we know before she passed away, she was obviously trying to divorce John Paul. They hadn't been living together since February. We know that he was dating at least one other female, the Susie Skinner, and we know that one of her final wishes was separating and divorcing John Paul. And so I think it's only right that we no longer address her as Mica Miller. I know I will definitely make an effort to drop the Miller from her name and address her by her maiden name, which was Mica Francis. Actually, her family is going to court right now to have this legally done. It sounds like either they're trying to either have her name returned to her maiden name, so Mica Francis, or just drop the Miller and have her Mica Acacia, which was her middle name. And of course, John Paul is arguing this in true John Paul fashion, even though, like I said, it makes no sense. They hadn't been living together. She clearly wanted to divorce him. He is dating another woman, or was dating at least one other woman that we know of, Susie Skinner. And so why he would argue to have her name changed, it just baffles me. It's just another control tactic, it seems like to me. I don't see why he would want to do that. In fact, that was his alibi. His alibi as to where he was when Mica passed away was that he was in, I believe it was Charleston, with Susie Skinner. That was his alibi. He was out with his new fling. And so his whole persona of the grieving husband, no one's buying it. And just, I think he should do the right thing for once and honor Mica's wishes and let her have the name Miller dropped from her legal name. And another big update is the release of the medical examination from Jennifer Altman. So she was actually a nurse. She had her master's in nursing. If you're not aware, I too am a nurse practitioner. And so apparently in North Carolina, they can also act as medical examiners, I suppose. And so she was the one that delivered this examination report. And so I think it's worth going over. There's some interesting information here. First, they did do a toxicology report on Mica. It only included alcohol, amphetamines, benzodiazepines, cocaine, gabapentin, and opioids, all of which did return negative. So from the things that they did test, nothing came back in her system. And in the report, they say that this further solidifies their notion that this was a self-inflicted unaliving. Now we have the report, and I think I want to break it down page by page and just go through this a little bit with you guys, and I'll point out some of the stuff that stood out to me. So on page 1, there's just some information surrounding the event, like the date and times, and you can see at 16:25, this is when Mica's body was found. They used military time, so that would be like 4:25 p.m. Medical examiner, they were notified at 18:30, and then she was examined at 20:13, or again, that's just after 8 p.m. And so you can see here they listed the COD as a GSW to the head. It's ruled as self-inflicted, and as we all know, there was no autopsy performed on Mica. To me, this in itself is very alarming. Like I said, I'm a nurse practitioner, but before that, I worked in the ER as an emergency nurse for 5 years. And in my personal experience, anytime there was what was considered an unnatural death, so either a self-inflicted unaliving or an unaliving by another person, or if there was an accidental death, there wasn't always an autopsy performed. So my personal experience, I find it very bizarre that they did not perform an autopsy on Mica. And so, an autopsy, this is a very in-depth examination of the person that's passed. And it really could have given us just more details surrounding Mica's passing. So for example, sometimes an autopsy could include x-rays if it's deemed appropriate. And so in Mica's case, maybe they would have done, a chest x-ray, and we could have seen if there was like water in her lungs, which could have helped to determine, had she passed before she entered the water. They can also look at like internal tissues, organs, determine if there's any kind of internal damage. And I don't want to pretend at all like I'm a forensic pathologist. I'm definitely not. But I do believe that an autopsy would have provided significantly more in-depth, obviously, examination of Mica, and perhaps would have settled some of this endless questions that we're getting from the public and from Mica's family. It would have just given us more information. Whatever the answers might have been, at least her family would have been a bit more confident in the accuracy of those answers had she had a more thorough examination and an autopsy. That's just my opinion though. And as we know, Mica was unfortunately cremated, so this is not even possible now to exhume her body and carry it out. So it's really unfortunate, I believe. But yeah, so back to now, let's look at the second page of the report. So under medical history, we can see a note of bipolar and a history of an unaliving attempt under Mica's medical history. And I find this part interesting too because dependent personality disorder is not listed here under her medical history, as they've mentioned, or as JP has mentioned that she was diagnosed with. And as it's mentioned, we'll see in the 4th page under the summary of circumstances. We'll get to that in a second, but I just thought it was interesting that here in the 2nd page, when she lists Mica's medical history, this alleged dependent personality disorder is not listed. I also find it odd that there's no primary care provider listed for Mica as well. And so I have to wonder who was managing Mica's healthcare, especially if she, allegedly had this history of mental health disorders such as bipolar 1, especially, if she was at one point taking lithium. Lithium has a very narrow therapeutic index, meaning that it could be very dangerous and toxic if she's not taking it correctly. And so something like lithium definitely needs to be managed by a provider and monitored very closely. And so for her not to have a primary care provider listed, I just find that bizarre. Further down the page, we see, a description of her body. We see that according to the report, rigor mortis had not set in at the time of the exam, but unfixed livor mortis had. And so livor mortis, this is the settling of blood in the dependent portion of the body post-mortem. So however they were positioned after they passed, this kind of pools in that most dependent area. This typically starts about 30 minutes to up to 4 hours, and it becomes fixed in about 8 to 12 hours. So that meaning, if it's fixed, that the pooled blood now doesn't move due to movement. So in Mica's case, we can see that the blood pooling occurred at the posterior aspect of her body. So that would have been like if she were lying on her back, it would have been pooling at the back. And there has been speculation regarding this because, in the report, we see that Mica was found in the prone position in the water or face down. I don't really find this that alarming because I believe that, they did get to her relatively quickly. That posterior pooling was probably due to when they repositioned her body when she was found and pulled from the water and, either on like a stretcher or on the table when they were examining her. She would have been on her back. And so that would make sense that she would have that posterior pooling. So the third page, so now we have the body diagrams. I think these pictures have made their way around the internet quite a bit already. Nothing to me stood out too much here, honestly. The closed skull fracture, the periorbital contusions, those are all pretty conducive to a GSW to the head. There was mention of minute postpartum wounds to that dorsal aspect of the left hand. So like that'd be the top of the hand. And I am curious to know, how this compares to the bruising of the hands mentioned by the family. It does appear like the medical examiner said that they took pictures of their own. And we know that the family has said that they also took their own pictures. So I am curious to see how those compare. It's just something that, makes me, I guess, ponder or wonder. I did also see some people mention the misspelling of retrieval on this and then questioning then the legitimacy of the document because of that spelling error. Honestly, I didn't really look too much into that as far as it now being a fake document because of the misspelled word. I do, however, think that it reflects, perhaps laziness on the examiner's part. She probably should have, checked her work, did a double check, especially, with this case having so much publicity. Clearly, the documents are going to be looked at with a fine-tooth comb. Honestly, I think it's just as a whole shows a little bit of maybe laziness, not even just the medical examiner, but the Robeson County Police Department as well. I think a lot of this is just kind of reflective of lazy work, in my opinion. Like I said, I absolutely think that an autopsy should have been done. And instead, it's like they just kind of saw Mica's medical history and brushed it off immediately without really doing their due diligence as self-inflicted. And, before I go on to the fourth page, I just want to emphasize again, I'm not saying that I don't think it's possible that Mica's COD was self-inflicted. I definitely think it is possible. Even though that's a really hard pill to swallow and accept, I do think it's possible. And I want to emphasize that I'm not saying I think that there is someone else to blame for pulling the trigger. That being said, I can still see why there is so much speculation from the public due to the fact that we know of all the abuse that was going on from Mica's mouth, from JP's mouth. And there's a lot of evidence that points to that. And statistically, we know that more often than not in female homicides, it is the partner that is the perpetrator. And so it makes sense to me that so many people are speculating this. And I think a lot of that speculation could have been fixed had Robeson County Police Department, had the medical examiner, had they done a better job, had they done their due diligence, had they done an autopsy, there wouldn't have been so much room left for speculation. But because it seems like the work done was lazy work, and because we know of the circumstances surrounding Mica's passing and her abusive partner, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that people are questioning things. And more than just the public speculating, Mica's family deserved those answers. And whether or not, Mica did or did not pull the trigger, in my opinion, like I said, there's no argument that John Paul was abusing Mica. He isolated and manipulated Mica, intimidated her. He used her devotion to God against her and made it feel almost impossible for her to be free of his torment. And regardless of who pulled the trigger, what JP did to Mica before her passing was criminal. And so that's why it infuriates people, including myself, that, it doesn't seem like John Paul has been held accountable for any of his actions. And what's even worse is he acted as a pastor when all of his behaviors point to the exact opposite. So if the Robeson County Police Department or any of the other police departments that have been involved would have just done their jobs and done their due diligence, I really believe that there would not have been such an outrage. But as the old saying goes, no justice, no peace. This is really what's happening in Mica's case. People don't think that Mica has gotten any justice, and so there's been no peace. All right, so now back to the last page of the Emmy report. So this is a summary of events leading up to Mica's passing and different details, surrounding the event. So we get a timeline of events such as how she was last seen visually by surveillance at the gas station in Mullins, South Carolina, and this was at 1333. And then verbally at 1454 was with the 911 dispatcher. At 1542, her car was found in the Lumber River State Park. And then at 1623, law enforcement was notified that a kayaker had found a body in the river. There were 2 spent casings and 1 live round at the bank of the river. And Mica's body was found face down in the water about 100 feet from the casings. And so now I'm, again, no expert in this field, although I wish I was, especially in this circumstance. But I definitely have questions here. For one, why are there 2 spent shell casings? If Mica was trained with using these things, why were 2 shots done? And if she was discovered 100 feet away in what is said is basically, stagnant water, why wasn't this, enough to warrant a complete investigation and an autopsy? The fact that there are 2 casings, 2 spent casings, I should say, at the bank of the water, and she was found 100 feet away from those 2 spent casings in essentially stagnant water. Why wouldn't that just warrant a further investigation? Even if the answers are not what people want to hear, I don't understand. It seems like they were lazy and they just looked at her medical history and immediately said, oh, self-inflicted. And yeah, so the remainder of the summary too, I found personally kind of bizarre. It's basically, in my opinion, conjecture as to why, a self-inflicted unaliving would make sense. Almost, again, trying to say see, this is why we did the bare minimum here, why we were too, lazy to do an autopsy, because she had mental health problems. So certainly it was self-inflicted, no need to look further. And again, just lazy in my opinion. They did not do their due diligence. So I really take issue with not only obviously John Paul, but the authorities in this case and their lack of investigation. And so again, this too is where where the medical examiner included the dependent personality disorder in the summary, but not in Mica's medical history. And I find that odd because, we do know that JP has said on multiple occasions that Mica had allegedly this dependent personality disorder. And so it's almost, seems like JP would have had something to do with the information provided in this summary from the medical examiner. Who really knows? We weren't there, but we do know that JP always tries to control the narrative, just like he always tries to make it out to seem that Mica was the one that had all of these mental health problems, when we know for certain that JP has had a history of mental health, or at least according to him, he has had a history of mental health problems. Let's, not forget that he told his own congregation that he himself was on 900 milligrams of lithium. That was out of John Paul's mouth, which is something that he has not taken the time to address. Instead, he keeps talking about Mica's alleged mental health problems. And so it's just another example, in my opinion, of John Paul trying to control the narrative.
For the past 4 weeks, I've had the most horrible battle and horrible time of my entire life. I've never, ever, 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 not even close, been through what I'm going through right now in life. Not even close. Horrible. I mean, horrible, so bad. I'm seeing a psychiatrist every week. I'm on 900 milligrams of lithium. I'm seeing a counselor every week. I'm going to inner healing. I'm going to deliverance 3 times a week with pastors in the area. I'm doing everything I can just to be able to get out of bed. I'm so depressed. I want to die. I'm battling suicidal thoughts. I have unforgiveness, hatred, demons coming out of me.
Which, by the way, I did want to mention that this 900 milligrams of lithium that John Paul admits to taking, this is typically the dosing that we would see in treatment of bipolar or acute mania. The 300 to 600 milligram dosing, this is less frequently used in major depressive disorder. It's definitely not first line treatment for major depressive disorder, But if it were those lower dosing, that would be more likely what it would be treating. The 900 milligrams of lithium that John Paul mentioned, this is definitely more in line as a treatment for bipolar or acute mania, which we know he loves to say that Mica was dealing with. But, the evidence points to John Paul for certain having bipolar. Not to say that Mica didn't as well, and no shame if she did. But for someone that constantly tries to paint this narrative of Mica with all of this mental illness, he really needs to take a step back and maybe self-reflect. And, if he wants to share mental health stories or stand on this soapbox for mental health, maybe he could share his own experiences, because we know that he has a history of lithium and likely, I think, bipolar. Also here in the summary, it's mentioned that in the past, she had paranoia and bizarre behaviors after consuming gummies, but her toxicology report didn't include any THC testing. I just found that kind of odd. If they were going to include that in the summary, why wouldn't they have done that in the toxicology report? And lastly, there is mention of the hydroxyzine for anxiety. So I would see this sometimes prescribed for anxiety. It's relatively new, I feel like, in the treatment of anxiety. It's basically like a very strong Benadryl, and so it definitely can make a person feel very drowsy, especially, depending on the dose that they're taking, and also especially if they're relatively new to using the medication. And so she had been prescribed this hydroxyzine just days before she had passed, and so I wonder if perhaps she was using this at the time that she made that 911 call, and that's why, she sounded almost flat and spoke so slowly. I wonder if she was new to taking this hydroxyzine and that made her sound that way. So those are just a few of the things that stood out to me when I read through the report from the Emmy. Like I said, overall, I think it was just lazy work done by the Emmy, done by the Robeson County Police Department. At bare minimum, I think that Mica deserved an autopsy. But really, I think it deserved a much more thorough investigation. She deserved that. Her family deserved that. So they could have answers and maybe some peace and justice. But like I said, I think they did just lazy work.
We're going to do a quick chilling time with Eric session. I've gotten a lot of messages recently about other missing people, missing females in Robeson County, North Carolina. And when we talk about Mica Miller and Justice for Mica, I've been getting a lot of messages from other people from Robeson County saying, hey, can you also talk about, my loved one, or talk about this person from Robeson County? And I started to realize that there's actually a lot of suspicious missing people cases in Robeson County. And when we talk about Justice for Mica, part of that Justice for Mica is advocating for other cases.
And so, yeah, I thought that video was a little odd. It definitely makes you wonder. I know that people were definitely questioning Robeson County and their quality of work that they did for Mica or in regards to her case. Definitely odd, though, that this is a theme coming out of Robeson County. I thought that was very odd. I'm curious to follow this man, Eric. So he is a private investigator that was actually hired by the family to do a more thorough investigation and maybe give them some answers. And I just thought it odd that he had mentioned that there are multiple, suspicious missing persons in Robeson County. Makes you wonder. But I just wanted to put that video in here so you could tell me what you think about that. But yeah, so JP also found himself back on TikTok. After a little bit of a hiatus there, I don't know exactly the amount of days, maybe like up to 2 weeks, he had not been on TikTok. And I was really wondering, wow, did his attorney get a hold of him and say, you need to get off of TikTok, man? I still would have to think any attorney would be begging him to stop getting on TikTok. But I think what it comes down to is John Paul always thinks that he knows best. And he has returned to TikTok to carry on and, to debunk the lies, according to John Paul. I also think that John Paul really just likes the sound of his own voice. And so he just had to get back on there so he can make these videos. And typically, I wouldn't want to listen to him anymore because honestly, when I listen to him, my stomach hurts. But I think there is something to gain from listening to what John Paul has to say, only because I want to continue to honor Mica and hopefully help in any way that I can to bring justice to Mica and her family, I think there is still an importance to listening to what John Paul has to say, as much as it makes me nauseous. But yeah, John Paul is back on TikTok, and he's finally taken the opportunity to address some of the more serious allegations, like the stalking and the harassing of Mica, the infidelities, the stalking and harassing of his first wife, the inappropriate relations with minors. He's finally addressing the stuff that we want to hear about. I don't know if you can sense the sarcasm, but just kidding. He is still talking about that damn tattoo. I can't emphasize enough how much the tattoo does not matter. But he has just gone on a rant about the tattoo. To me, listening to him, he does sound a bit manic. Again, I'm not diagnosing, and it's hard to say, but he really focuses on that small detail. And another part of me really just thinks that he's trying to divert the attention from any of the more serious accusations because he obviously doesn't want to address those. It's obvious.
Anyway, man, y'all are so funny. Why in the world would you? I don't understand why you think I'd lie about anything with all this. Why in the world would I make a fake tattoo and put it on there and tell y'all it's real? I just don't get y'all. Hey, seriously, I cannot get over how offended I am that somebody took my picture when my gut was hanging out. Okay, normally when I see the cameras, I suck in really good. So, you dodos, I can't believe y'all think that tattoo's fake. She begged me for years to get that. Years! And I didn't like pain, I didn't like tattoos, and then finally, I did it, and, why would y'all think that'd be, why would I get a fake tattoo? Oh my gosh. Crazy. And what kind of a pathetic person wants to take a picture of me out on the beach and then spend their social media energy saying I have a fake tattoo that wasn't there. Like, you need a job. Like, you need a life. You need to find somebody that loves you. Somebody that can spend their life with you, and y'all can go out and go to the movies and go on dates. They need to go to church.
It's just frustrating that he's been given this platform to address the public and maybe take some accountability. And instead, this is the stuff that he focuses on. It's frustrating to me. He also did make a video addressing the time that we saw John Paul rolling around in the grass, making a fool of himself.
This makes me go crazy.
Did somebody helping you?
He thinks that Mark's coming to get me.
Oh, okay.
I thought I was going to see Jesus.
And he says that it is because he accidentally or whatever took too many of his pain medications, because just prior to, he had broken 12 bones after falling out of a tree. And in that video, he had just recently got out of a body cast. I can't help it, but I really just have the hardest time believing anything that comes out of his mouth. It reminds me of the wives' tale, the boy who cried wolf, where he told so many lies that when he finally told the truth, nobody believed him. So I wouldn't even know when to believe what he says because of all the lies that he tells. Maybe he's telling the truth there, maybe not. It's really hard to know because he has such a history of telling lies. Aside from all of the lies and John Paul's attempts at gaslighting the public, I think probably the thing that stands out to me the most is that in none of John Paul's videos does he appear to be a grieving husband. In no way. I don't think he ever even says Mica's name. And there are no signs of grief. Again, I know that everybody grieves differently, but he just does not seem at all sad. And the circumstances are horrible surrounding Mica's passing. Where is his grief? Where is his love for Mica? He doesn't even speak highly of her ever. He only talks, I feel like, poorly about Mica. Yeah, he wants her to keep his last name and he wants to wear a wedding ring and pretend like he is a grieving husband in the sense that he just says the words. But in no way does anything that John Paul says or does reflect a grieving husband. And so that also, not only obviously irks me, but definitely irks the public and just adds to, the speculation surrounding the events of her death. And yeah, again, that's why it's just so nauseating to listen to him talk, because Mica is no longer here on earth and he's supposed to be this grieving husband, but instead he only talks poorly of her, and there's just no sign of sadness at all from him. And I feel like just lies after lies. Although I will say that he did say finally one truthful thing, and that was he reiterated something that his lawyer had told him, and that's guilty people talk the most. And yeah, I agree. Guilty people do speak the most.
My lawyer said something months and months ago. He said, the guilty person is the person who talks the most. I said, what do you mean? He said, the guilty person, in any situation, the guilty one is the one that's always out there talking the most. So just look at that person.
Says the unemployed pastor ranting on TikTok. Guilty do speak the loudest. I think that's the first statement that I've believed coming out of his mouth, and I couldn't agree more. But anyways, I think that's going to be all for today's video. Make sure if you haven't already checked out justiceformica.com. It's a website run by the family. There's some information there regarding Mica's law. There's different places that you can donate to the family to help them continue their fight in pursuing justice for Mica. Lots of really important stuff there. So make sure if you haven't, you check it out. You share it with others. It's the small things that we can do to just help the family get justice. Otherwise, I wish you guys nothing but the best, and we'll talk soon. Bye.